I'm the director of the Austrian Institute of International Affairs, the OIIE, an academic research institution that was founded 32 years ago from now, at that time founded by the late Chancellor Bruno Kreisky, whom at least some of you still know. He was one of the few Austrian politicians who were really very fond of international relations. He was a diplomat, and he was one of the most outstanding politicians Austria ever had. And when he founded the Austrian Institute for International Affairs, it was his idea that the Austrian society, which at that time was a little bit more inward-looking, a little bit more backward than today. Well, today I think the Austrian society already is a little bit more inward-looking and, well, not so backward than at that time. But what we tried is also to make the Austrian society understand that there is more than Austria, than there is a world around us. And besides my position as director of the Austrian Institute, I'm also a teacher at the Vienna University, at the Danube University and so on. And so it came that, well, then more than 30 years I'm dealing also in my seminars and in my lectures with the topics and with the institution of the United Nations. And it's not always in the focus, of course, but it's as one of as the most important international organization worldwide. Of course, it has its position in all the lectures and also in the examinations I'm doing. When I just only reflect what has been said on the last panel, I can well understand that it's difficult, especially I think here in Austria, to do PR for United Nations. I have been also dealing with civic education for grown-ups, civic education for civil servants, civic education especially also for teachers of all dimensions here in Austria. And it's complicated, yeah? But one has to go on, one has to deal with the problems. And I also have to say that on the other hand, it's not so easy to get actively involved with the United Nations institutions here on the other side of the Danube. So if you want to get somebody for one of the, which I think, interesting conferences and meetings that we have each year, well, it's difficult. On the other hand, to explain to the people of the municipality of Vienna or of the other ministries that it would be interesting perhaps, or it would be even prestigious for Austria when we would show much more of what we have on the other side of the Danube. They say, well, we're doing so much, don't exaggerate, and I think it's okay. So it's still a problem, but I think we all should work together that it will improve. That having said, I understand that we have only 1 hour left. We have now 6 panelists here, and I think it's a very interesting contributions that we will hear. I would like to ask from my right side, beginning, that every speaker just says a few words about her or himself. Thank you.
The UN Studies Association, which is basically an informal working group of the Academic Council on the United Nations. We have founded the working group in 2007 with the idea to bring together academics and practitioners from the UN to organize large projects in order to promote UN studies as a field of studies in its own right at academic level throughout the world. And Well, we've accomplished so far several projects, and one of them is the Journal on International Organization Studies, whose editor-in-chief is among us today, and Kirsten Haag. She's on the next panel, so she'll have the chance to let you know about maybe the last issue or any other information on this great journal. Another project was to help to organize this conference, and hopefully we'll be able to also support the Delhi conference project, which was discussed this morning with Slavomir Redo, to support with any IT basics. Well, this has been all about the UNSA in a nutshell.
Kunz, and Professor of International Relations at Wilfrid Laurier University in Canada. Quickly.
Alexander Milanov, and I've just finished my PhD in the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. I will speak about responsibility of United Nations and academia in exchanging information about outer space. There is a little change of program. I was supposed also to speak yesterday in outer space panel, but I'm really glad here that I was invited to join this discussion, this panel, and I'm looking forward to present it. Thank you.
Head of Administration of WMO, a specialized agency in Geneva, and I have been in the same field of work for the last nearly 30 years around the world for different UN agencies. Thank you.
I'm Yuliana Sokova. I am currently Assistant Director of the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies at the Monterey Institute of International Studies, a graduate school of Middlebury College. I know it's a mouthful. I'm also currently a designated executive director of the newly established Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation here in Vienna, Austria. I already spoke at one of the panels before, and I apologize for repeating this information for those who attended this panel.
Professor and Chief Scientific Advisor at the University of Pécs, Hungary, with the task of coordinating and implementing migrant health areas programs on both in research and training. Previously, I have been working for 12 years for the International Organization for Migration, and during my period in Brussels, when I was heading its European migrant health activities, I have established an excellent relation and cooperation with the UNHCR.
A description to some extent of what we do, but that's not just as a description of what we do, because what we do is trying to build relationships between academia and practitioners. And since I'm also a professor and I do teaching at the same time, this is the kind of thing that I do to bring the real world into the classroom life of my students. There's a number of ways that ACRINS tries and that I try as a professor to bring practitioners' knowledge into my classroom and to build relationships. Before you can improve relations between academia and UN organizations, they have to exist. So the first thing you do is try to contact the UN organizations and get them to recognize that you exist. But having done that, you can build that relationship. Michael has been wonderful for us here, Michael Platzer, in doing a conference like this and getting us physically co-located. Slavomir had a proposal for a conference in Delhi, and it starts off with a quotation from George Bernard Shaw: "The greatest illusion of communication is that it has taken place." And being co-located doesn't mean you've actually spoken to each other, it means you've sat in a room together. So what I try to do with my students and what ACRINS tries to do is engage with UN organizations, UN initiatives, and other non-UN agencies for that matter. So some examples, this is 5 minutes and I'm done and we'll move on. Some examples of the kind of initiatives that we've engaged in with various UN organizations. With the folks here, with Tibor Toth, with the CTBT, with their e-learning initiative, we have tried to in a sense, advertise or disseminate to our global network of 2,500 recipients of our information the existence of that e-learning program, and invite our membership to participate, to send in their input. As Jean Deprez noted yesterday, they got about 300 people participating in their online discussions. And we were very grateful for the opportunity. Unless those organizations let us know that it's happening, unless we communicate with each other, we can't engage with them. So we were very happy to do that. We have advertised in our newsletter, the ACRINS newsletter. We were approached by the UN Development Group, along with UNESCO, UNICEF, and the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, for an online e-discussion, Education Closing the Gap, a live discussion there, and our membership was invited to participate in that discussion, and has done so, with those members who are interested in doing so at any rate. Were encouraged to take part in that discussion and put in their expertise into that ongoing UN discussion group. The Global Environmental Governance Project, the GEG project, was feeding into the ministerial meetings on climate change. One of our members was designated a local authority expert as part of the civil society discussions. And our membership again was invited to send to her and to her NGO partner any material, expert materials, which they could then draw on and feed into that process. Right now we're working with another group in the United States which really focuses on US educational institutions, the Higher Education Alliance for the UN, which identifies, as they say, vigorous and engaged and committed speakers, practitioners and academics about the UN to go to schools, not to universities, but to what we call secondary level schools across the United States, or underserved schools. If you're at Harvard and MIT and other places, you have so many people coming in, you don't know which way to turn. The biggest problem is figuring out what you can fit into your schedule. But if you are, for example, at an underserved, essentially black inner city college in Detroit, you don't have the resources and nobody wants to go and speak to you. So we're part of an initiative to bring UN speakers and others to there. They have wonderful students who desperately want to be engaged and nobody goes to see them. So we're trying to do that with various consortia of community colleges across the United States in underserved or unserved areas of the United States. And then also working with Maher Nasser and Ramu Damodaran on the Academic Impact Initiative, trying to engage again with our network. There's a number of ways we can do these things. We can bring the classroom to them or bring them to the classroom. You can do that physically by getting them to come in or bringing my classes to them, which we also do. You can do it virtually, which we do through webcasts, and we have a podcast series. Now we're trying to develop 2 podcasts, a thematic podcast and a professional development podcast, which can be aimed at professional development for young academics or professional development for young UN officers. A 2-week-long, a 10-day-long summer workshop. Half of the participants, about 10 of them, are young UN officers and half are academics. So we put them together in essentially an extended graduate level seminar for 2 weeks. We've done that for 21 of our 25 years. So now the person who, previous to this one, was the executive assistant to the Secretary General, had been a participant in our workshop, had then been a director of our workshop. So people who are going through our network could be connected to folks like that. So we've tried physically to bring people together, we've tried virtually to bring people together, and then developing curricular training, developing new teaching programs through things like supporting the UN Studies Association. Young people discussing what it is they want to talk about the UN and how to do it. So we're in a sense, not in the bad sense, the godfathers or the godparents of this kind of an initiative. So they whatever Julia will want to say to you, she's a living example of one of the ways that we're trying to connect academics and practitioners together as well. So those are some of our initiatives. I'm going to shut up. You can ask me questions about it afterwards. So we'll move on to whoever's next on the list. Thank you.
Well, what I'm going to propose is just some thoughts I've noted down and I want to throw in as food for thought for the following discussion. I will shed a theoretical light on the question of how to bring in how to bring in practitioners' knowledge into academia. Before pondering over this question, we should take a step back and look on the structural constraints which practitioners are facing when accessing the academic world. Namely that they encounter a different knowledge background in academia or in scholarly institutions. Long-term UN practitioners possess a different knowledge on the UN than academics do, who basically have learned about the UN via textbooks and other learning material. Their knowledge about the UN is mainly implicit. It cannot be told or said, expressed into words or categories or theories or whatever. Practitioners have access to the UN. The UN forms their daily working environment, and what they know about the UN is a more kind of a know-how, which is not explicit. To the contrast, academics who have more learned of the UN via textbooks, as I have said, they learn about the UN from the outside, and their knowledge about the UN is explicit. It can be expressed in words, it can be categorized, it can be systematized, analyzed, it is based on theories, and it is a socially shared knowledge because it can be because it's explicit in contrast to practitioners' knowledge. I know I'm very aware that what I'm saying is that I'm drawing a very strict image of practitioners and academics, and I know that these are not two worlds apart. Academics do indeed work at the UN, and also practitioners are teachers in universities. But what I try to emphasize here is that we do have different knowledge worlds. We do have the real UN, which forms a working environment, and on the other side we have the UN as an epistemic object, which consists of categories, theories, etc. So if we take that and we go back to the example, we do have a practitioner who comes to a classroom, to the university, and stands in front of the student. The question, and we invite him to come. What is he going to do? He just can't stand there and say, well, I'm going to talk about my experiences in the UN. No, what he has to do is to previously assume the categories or also the language with which he makes his implicit knowledge explicit. So what he does is that he has to assume this academic language about the UN to transfer his knowledge to students. This is an advantage because practitioners can take on this, let's say, scholarly toolbox in order to make their implicit knowledge explicit. On the other hand, a practitioner who assumes this scholarly theoretical background makes his implicit knowledge explicit, and in this way he kind of pre-structures what he is going to say and what he's going to think and express in words. So he takes on these existing categories and patterns of thinking in academia. And so what he's going to say is practically biased and framed within scholarly theoretical terms. So we have to think about that and be very aware of what is happening. If we really want to harness practitioners' knowledge, which is doubtless a fruitful source of innovative and creative thinking for academia, we have to think of how to create the appropriate environments where practitioners can discuss with academics on a same level, and also to generate and develop a common language and common theories and a common thinking of the UN. And yes, I think the following panel will discuss in practice how to do that. And I just wanted to throw in the problem that we really have to think of creating structures that enable not only the exchange and synergies of different knowledge backgrounds, but also to generate new knowledge about the UN. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday we have heard a lot about global challenges, about global problems. Today, I would like to draw your attention to a global challenge that you're not going to hear very often to be discussed in United Nations or in universities or in other kinds of institutes. What makes a person to be a good scholar? In my opinion, there are 4 basic steps that should be taken. The first one is that this person should always have an open mind. The second one is that he should be careful what kind of information he is dealing with and should find the important information for his research. The third step is to transform this important information into knowledge, to integrate this information into his belief system and to understand its importance. The fourth step is to give this knowledge to the people. I'm going to discuss a topic today which is considered as extremely sensitive by people who know about this topic and ridiculous from people who don't know nothing about it. I'm going to talk about extraterrestrial life and the phenomenon of UFO, unidentified flying objects. 3 years ago, I was completely ignorant about this topic. I have started a research. I have started my research with people who I know in Bulgarian military, who are I have spoken with a distinguished person who has been working for Bulgarian military, and he told me amazing things that are going on. I was surprised. I was surprised because this information was kept secret. This information never got to the United Nations, as to my knowledge, and this information is not discussed at all seriously in academia. Is it allowed, first of all, this topic to be secret? International law says it is not allowed. My expertise is in outer space and space law, and I will just briefly read Article 11 from Outer Space Treaty in order for you to know that this is violation of international law to keep hidden such important information. Article 11 says, in order to promote international cooperation in the peaceful exploration and use of outer space, states party to the treaty conducting activities in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, agree to inform the Secretary General of the United Nations, as well as the public and the international scientific community to the greatest extent feasible and practicable of the nature, conduct, locations and results of such activities. On receiving the said information, the Secretary General of the United Nations should be prepared to disseminate it immediately and effectively. This person that I have spoken with, he told me that in Bulgaria, in 1985, a UFO, an alien spacecraft, landed in Bulgaria. This was done very close to Sofia. Actually, now it is part of Sofia. And a military team was formed to cut out the area and to just understand what is going on. What happened is that people who were participating, they were of course a little bit surprised, afraid about this thing. They have made a video, they have even touched it, and after several hours, this object flew with amazing, tremendous speed and get out of Bulgaria and of airspace. I would like to tell you that this information about extraterrestrial life and UFOs is real, and you can find it very easily now because of internet. There are testimonies, official documents. There is a hard evidence of this, and we should be prepared about this, because this is maybe the most important thing that we are going to face in the near future. I will give you the words of distinguished people. I will start with Admiral Gilles Pinon, who is a French admiral who has passed away recently. Several months before he passed away, he has written an open letter to President Sarkozy. You can find this also in internet. The letter says, "These unusual aerospace phenomena are regularly in our airspace. They are commonly known as UFOs. The Centre National d'Études Spéciales prefers to give them the name of PAN, Phenomenon Aerospatial Unidentified. Before trying to give them an interpretation, we must recognize the obvious and simple fact that they exist." This is a French admiral who is giving this statement. The United Nations have been contacted by another distinguished person. This is an astronaut. Maybe most of you have heard about him. This is the astronaut Gordon Cooper, and he has written an open letter which you will be able to find in the documents near the door. Since I don't have much time, I will just say that in his letter, Mr. Cooper said the letter is addressed to Ambassador Griffith in November 9, 1978. And he says, "Dear Ambassador Griffith, I want to convey to you my views on our extraterrestrial visitors, popularly referred to as UFOs, and suggested what might be done to properly deal with them." I will not finish with the whole letter, but as I said, you can find it very easily in internet, or you can read it here. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel that right now I'm talking on behalf of many young and not so young people who are out of the box, because there is a box inside a box inside a box, and these boxes have been created in this way that a vicious circle has been created. This vicious circle is the following. Something happens. The information stays to the government. People want to know about this information. Academia, they're asking for the government, they're asking for the United Nations, but they don't receive information, so people don't know about it. The governments are asking for their intelligence community, but also sometimes they do not receive the whole information from them. So we have to get out of this box and make a serious research about this phenomena in order to be prepared. Thank you very much. If you have questions after the panel, I will be ready to reply.
I'm back to the issue of practitioner and academia and how to work together, how to bring those two cultures together, which are in fact quite separate. To do this, I try to sketch a little bit what I see the academic culture in the UN system, or what are the boundaries of of this work. First, the UN works essentially by consensus, which favors the lowest common denominator. I think that is embedded in the work of the organization, of many organizations. Second, I would argue that facts are argued always with a political connotation. Essentially, these are an organization of member states who defend national interests, so facts are seen in that light. Third, I would argue that there is still a certain level of secrecy in the UN, especially involving discussion on sensitive political issues. Finally, the UN work, or UN research, or research-related work, is in fact done anonymous. As you know, there are no authors, but the organization itself presents the information. Now, going to the academic world, I think all those criteria do not apply, or should not apply, to good research. And this is maybe why there is such a difficult way of meeting both cultures, which yesterday Mr. Chawla from UNODC mentioned. There is a very thin ice between those two areas, the work of the UN system and research work. Now, how do those cultures interact? I would argue that at this stage, academic expertise is used quite unsystematically in the work of the United Nations as part of preparing studies, or, for example, as part of conducting training events. Academics use UN data for research, the other way around. Again, this is hampered by access to the data, which can result in limited relevance of the research, somewhat detached from what actually goes on in the organization. As a practitioner, I would like to venture into a somewhat alternative model, which already is emerging in the UN system. I would suggest that the major part, and that's a big part of the UN work, in establishing knowledge for policy making can be indeed allocated to the academia world. And that should be a structured and systematic use of global academic knowledge to form this knowledge base for the policy making. I just want to give a few examples. Yesterday, Dr. Toth from CTBTO spoke about the establishment of a global network of technical centers. If I heard him right, it involves about 10,000 people, a large chunk of the scientific community, which is actively involved in maintaining that system. These are not UN staff members, these are part of the scientific world, or some of those. UNODC spoke yesterday about a network of judges to prepare a digest on terrorist cases. Again, this is a kind of an allocation of work to the academic world outside the organization. I would also like to mention experience in our own organization, WMO. We administer and cooperate with the International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. I assume some of you have heard from them. It's a small organization, about 10 people only, and they're in charge of putting together climate assessment reports. This is done by bringing together the consolidated expertise of 2,500 scientists. They drive and direct the work of those reports, structured through subcommittees. The report issued in the late 90s, you may recall, was one of the most famous UN report I think ever issued. It led to the award of the Peace Nobel Prize to IPCC and provided global coverage to the issue of global warming. The report presents a global scientific opinion for UN policy making. it has a high level of integrity. And I think the model of IPCC, or how this is done, could be adopted, or is adopted now, to a number of other issues to provide integration between the academic world and the UN practitioners. Institutionally, the model is now copied by a similar arrangement for biodiversity under the umbrella of UNEP. So there will be a kind of an IPCC on biodiversity pretty soon in operation. And one could expand this model to other subjects. Just to come back to the discussion of yesterday, for example, a report like the World Drug Report could also be issued in a similar fashion. The IPCC model breaks down the rigid separation between the UN and the academic institution. It creates an overlapping area which fosters cooperation. Other models can be considered, such as entrusting an academic institution or a group of academic institutions with tasks previously performed by the UN. As an example is the monitoring of the implementation of the Millennium Development Goals entrusted by UNDP to a project team at Columbia University headed by Jeffrey Sachs. Again, this could be a model for other subjects as well. I would like to maybe come to another aspect which, as a practitioner, I feel quite, I have a concern, which is the focus of research in the academic world on issues of the UN. Obviously, this is driven by opportunity, access to data, access to organization, and of course also follows what is in the public interest at this stage, be it peacekeeping or human rights. I think that approach neglects somewhat some areas which do not tend to be easily accessible, but which could have a big importance for the work of the organization to channel research into that area. There is an under-researched aspect of the work of the UN. For example, I would mention everything to do with interagency coordination. There is very little research I can see from the academic world, and a large contribution could be made. A lot of PhD could be written on those subjects. I also would welcome a kind of a comprehensive assessment, critical assessment of the work of the UN on an annual basis. Again, this type of work seems to be not available. So I think practitioners have a role in suggesting or guiding or directing the research work in the academic world. And one should maybe institutionalize this type of guidance through a number of mechanisms. One could think about an advisory council of practitioners for academic institutions, for example. But I think there is quite a large field still to be covered. Thank you.
Caution that my comments, although I'm sure that education and in the area of disarmament and non-proliferation could be extrapolated to the other areas of the UN and academia interaction, but still based on my own and our organization experience in teaching non-proliferation and disarmament issues. So if some of them do not apply to other areas or a little bit different, please forgive me for that. But I would also pick up on some of the themes already mentioned by other speakers today. And one of the themes that was already brought up is the exchange or a two-way process of bringing practitioners into academic world and vice versa, academics to the practitioners and United Nations organization or international governmental organization. And as I go forward, I will explain what I mean by that. Another point that I would probably like to make at the very premise of the presentation is that quite often we do have a little bit of a terminology or issue here or misunderstanding. Quite often we lump together various type of activities that could be an awareness and outreach program, an educational program, academic program, or a professional development training program. So quite often when we discuss some of this issue, we do not differentiate between them. But in fact, it is quite important to look at them in a continuum. On one hand, they complement each other, but on the other hand, each one of these specific types of activities has different goals, different objectives, and have different methodology. So this is another issue to keep in mind. And when we speak about the work that has already been done, or many projects that we were informed about even at this conference, much of the work of international organizations in this field is focused on awareness, outreach, and training programs. To a less degree, it relates to the academic programs, I will put it this way. I'm not trying to say that it's completely absent. There quite a lot is being done, and we do see a number of new emerging projects, including the one was mentioned by Tibor Toth, the CTBTO. But I would say there is still a long way to go when it comes to the international governmental organizations and UN system in general, and academic education, academic institutions. Going to some of the other themes brought up here is what are the goals of the education? Who are we preparing? And that should also drive the interaction between the academic institution and UN organizations. What is, at least speaking from the US experience, the marketability of students, their ability to find jobs is one of the most driving issues for a younger generation. It is also for some of the international organizations is an ability to find specialists with certain set of skills to replace existing or expanding cadres that they look forward to. In this sense, involvement of practitioners in the academic classroom is very important. That's where the students get a flavor of the real world, and that's what makes them more marketable, so to speak. How do you bring practitioners into the classroom? We already heard about this. Online interaction, podcasts, Skype, and everything else. But what I wanted to focus on in this regard, trying to what you have mentioned, is you also need to bring academics and researchers into international organizations and provide access for them to spend time and observe the practices that are at the various meetings, conferences at the international organizations. And unfortunately, it's not always the case that academic institutions, researchers can easily get access to international organizations. It's not across the board the case, but even in my own experience, getting access to some of the IAEA meetings or some other organizations, quite often there is a tendency to limit, not to expand the access of non-governmental experts or academic to some of the meetings. There could be different explanations to that. There are certain areas where probably indeed the information is confidential, but in many other areas it's driven by nothing but willingness not to expose some of the political discussions and debates going in the room, sensitivity of the information in that respect. And I think until the international organizations make a concerted effort to engage practitioners in the debate as observers, as participants in the meetings, it's wonderful to have them as contributors, as researchers, but there should be more and much more broader access for academics to international organizations. There is also very important to have resources for the academics and researchers to participate in this work. And it's probably one of the issues that will always be on the agenda, and it's member states and international organizations that both need to make an effort to provide resources. Academias are not well paid field in many countries, and bringing them to participate in New York sessions or Geneva or Vienna is not an easy task. Maybe something that could be discussed. And also bringing them into networks of professionals. In addition to UN system and international governmental organizations, there are a number of professional associations that focus on these issues. That's another way of kind of expanding horizons for the practitioners. And I will probably stop on that and give others the floor.
We'll start to speak about a special, but I think a significant part of why academic and UN practitioners should be connected. Then I just would like to join to what Director Sokova said, that of course one of the main tasks of academies is to train professionals who are capable to cope with all those new challenges what the UN system and our world is just facing. When I'm speaking about migration, I think just in the reflection of the recent developments in the Maghreb countries that resulted that several thousand of migrants are heading from that region to Europe and Italy, and their healthcare system is one of the gatekeepers in this field, then I think there is no question about that they have to fulfill a double task. On one hand, the humanitarian assistance of the migrants, and on the other hand, of course, to provide for the home country, Italy, and Europe as a whole, the necessary public health safety. So when I'm speaking about this new training programs, then I think I have to just to add that, of course, it is not only a problem for Europe, but it is a program for all the UN member states, because migration now is a priority issue for the entire world. May I just, although I know that I have limited time, recall some of the thoughts that last year at the annual ECUMS meeting here in Vienna, when security threats were discussed, I was giving a presentation on migration-related health and public health threats. The next slide, please. I just want to go very shortly on this. At the beginning of the 21st century, migration is a global phenomenon when yearly, the next slide is, about 200 million people are crossing the borders of their home country. Out of them, of course, a significant magnitude, nearly half of them are looking for some possible of coping with all those economic challenges what their home country cannot provide for them and for the family. The next slide, please. But when we are going back to the health impact, of course, migrants are representing their mobility profile, health conditions of their country of origin that might be significantly different from the target country. But what is even more important, that it is not only a question of rare and re-emerging diseases, but also vaccine-preventable diseases may occur also on those parts of the world where some of the diseases have been practically eradicated because of the general vaccination policy. The next slide, please. Of course, when we are speaking about migration, there are some visions that are induced by the media that hundreds of thousands of migrants are heading, but of course not with the Boeing Dreamliner, but the next slide is much more likely with the conditions like this. And I was also very much happy to learn those words that were related on human trafficking, because the magnitude of those and who need a special health assistance is only in the western part of Europe nearly to 500,000. The next slide, please. Of course, migration has always the next historical path, so that already the Hittites were using migration as an ancient bioweapon. The next slide, please. Of course, the invasion of Cortes and the 1,000 people has resulted in an epidemic disaster in Central America, when in a shorter period than 100 years, the local population, the Indians, dropped from 25 million down to 1 million. So, the next slide, please. When we are speaking about why there is need for specially trained professionals who are capable to cope with these new challenges, that is not only a simple knowledge on special diseases there in Europe, but also it is a knowledge how to handle the multicultural, multi-religious aspects that are resulting in differences in health attitudes, health behavior, and how health professionals can able to establish a partnership with the patients. Because in the medicine, that is a basic issue, that the partnership between the physician, the practitioner, and the patients should be based on the mutual trust. And if the physician is not prepared to handle this multicultural, multi-religious aspects, then already at the first point of the patient-physician relation, they are failed to establish the mutual trust. The next. That is just, of course, migration has really serious health hazard. If we are looking at the human poverty index, the next slide, that is very much matching the distribution of HIV population. The next slide, please, and also the TB. So that the source countries, of course, they may host maybe the source not only migrants, but also source of some epidemic level diseases. But the problem is exactly not the public health impact, but this multidisciplinary impact of how to handle the issues when, of course, providing the necessary public health safety, but at the same time being able to cope with all those multicultural aspects that migrants are right to when contracting the health services. And not speaking about that, it has a very significant economical problem. Just for the European Union, the demographic trends are clearly showing that the Union is in seek of the quote healthy workforce. So, last year, when I was speaking about all those aspects, we were already in the preparation, and I'm happy to tell to you that University of Pécs, leading a consortium of Austrian, German, UK, and Slovakian universities. The next slide, please. And also the next one. Next one. Has successfully gained Erasmus curriculum development fund and started to develop a 3-semester master curriculum on migrant health. This curriculum aims to address all those aspects. The next slide, please. Built around 6 main competencies: epidemiology and research, methodology, environmental medicine, occupational health, economic health, economic impact of migration, organization and system management, clinical and public health assessment, social and behavior aspects of migration. And when you may raise the question that yes, it's migrant health and why an economic module there. So that that is when I want to underline it should be a multidisciplinary aspect because those who are the health assistance providers has been well aware about that why the country of origin is in the need of migrants. And as a result of a snowball effect, they may spread around. It's unfortunately well known that a significant part of the European population is not really for the favor of migrants. It should be a general entitlement receiving those migrant-friendly, migrant-sensitive health assistance. This is when first we have to think about whether at the moment do we have that human resources who are capable to provide and cope with this task. And as a last sentence, I was really very lucky that Professor Simai in his speech has highlighted that the Hungarian UN Association is running a moving academy. And the next step will be in my hometown in Pécs, where migration-related aspects will be the topics of this mobile academy. Thank you very much.